Greetings from Tokyo. This is Daisuke Beppu, and I hope you are having a great day today. It is November 12th, 2018, and so we are still in the midst of the 2018 November Barnes & Noble sale for those of you who are in North America or the United States. And so I am getting a lot of really nice questions from a number of viewers. One question I received was from Mr. Bellboy552. Hello. And you say, very kindly, you say, "Hi Daisuke, glad to see you are doing well." Thank you. Incredible recommendations as always. Thank you very much. I was wondering if you would be able to recommend any good horror or sci-fi films within the Criterion Collection. I've recently been ravenous in devouring many of the classics from both genres and would very much like to hear your thoughts on the essentials in the Criterion Collection. Now, this is a very interesting question indeed. There are a number of great horror films and sci-fi films within the Criterion Collection currently that I think are worth mentioning. So without further ado, let me begin with some horror films. Now, these are not going to be all of the horror films, and these aren't going to be all of the films that I like, because there are other films that I like, but these, I think, should provide a good sampling of the horror films that are currently in the Criterion Collection. So hopefully you might find this interesting. I hope so anyway. Anyway, let's start with the horror films. Here is the film 1968, Kuro Nickel. This is a Japanese film, and it's quite a it's not a in-your-face horror film, but it's a typical Japanese horror film at the time, and it has a certain style to it that I think if you can get into, you will really get into. So Kuro Nickel. We have Kwaidan, which is the English title, Kwaidan. So this is another Japanese horror film from that era, and highly recommended. It's very long, it's an omnibus film, but again, if you can get into this style of film, it is something that will reap plenty of rewards. So Kwaidan. Speaking of Japanese horror, I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention this film from 1977, House. I think the less said about this, the better, except to say that you will have such a wonderful, wild, zany ride when you watch this film, if you haven't seen it already. Highly recommended. You should go in without knowing anything, and I think you will have a great time. House. Here is a classic, a modern classic here, Silence of the Lambs. And I've spoken about this already in a separate video, but this is a film that introduces a modern horror icon, that is Hannibal Lecter, but I think also it introduces the iconic character of Clarice Starling in this world that is filled with risk and danger and quite a bit of horror too. So it's a very compelling story indeed to watch Clarice Starling trying to navigate her way through this world, The Silence of the Lambs. Here is a film from 1968. This is Night of the Living Dead. This is a film directed by George A. Romero, and for me, it is a film that I think represents a turning point in cinematic history. There are certain films that do that, but I think this is one of them. When I see the film, every time I see the film, I'm always amazed at how I feel like the film era, or the historical era, is shifting before our very eyes as we watch this film evolve from some kind of 50s, early 60s Americana life into something that becomes devolved into something chaotic and absolutely horrifying which thus brings in the late 60s and beyond. It's a real wonderful time capsule of a horror film, if you know what I mean. That is Night of the Living Dead. This is a film from 1960 called Eyes Without a Face. And this is a film that I think has a certain level of shock value, and it has a high level of creepiness. An incredibly creepy film, Eyes Without a Face. One of the great horror films of the Criterion Collection. This is Carnival of Souls. Now, Carnival of Souls is a really low-budget independent film, but I think one of the great things about horror is that it can thrive on the limited elements of a low-budget independent production, and this is the prime example of that. It is one of the most frightening films, and it does so with very little elements there, but what it has to work with, it just, it just knows what it's doing with its limited resources, and it just runs with those in a way that is utterly frightening. There are some shots in here that will never leave me. Carnival of Souls. Rosemarys Baby. This is from 1968, and I do have issues, very fundamental issues and problems with the director of this film. I won't name the director, but that should be for another video. But despite my misgivings about that director's status, I still am fully behind this film, and I think the film as a product of efforts of a group of people, including the star Mia Farrow, who is just a wonderful, vulnerable, yet dedicated and earnest character here as Rosemary, is truly electric. Now, this is one of the more famous horror films in the Criterion Collection, so perhaps chances are you've probably seen the film already. But just in case you haven't, it's well worth a look. So, Rosemarys Baby. Here is a film from David Cronenberg from 1983. So this is Videodrome. Now, David Cronenberg has a number of films in the Criterion Collection. Scanners, The Brood, Naked Lunch, Dead Ringers, which is now out of print. And however, I think that Videodrome is the one to get if you're going to choose one, because I think it's filled with so many ideas and concepts that are so Cronenberg-esque that this, for me, becomes the emblematic or iconic or representative film of early Cronenberg. That is, early Cronenberg meaning Cronenberg films from the 70s and early 80s. So this almost feels like a culmination of the ideas that he was working with, starting from from Shivers and Rabbit and all the way up through Scanners and The Brood, etc. So this is, to me, the epitome of early Cronenberg at its finest. Gross and icky and smart, and really a tour de force performance by James Woods. Videodrome. This is a DVD, but from 1922. But if you're okay with DVD, then I would highly recommend this silent film. This is Hexam, Witchcraft Through the Ages. Now, to describe this film, I think would take more time than I'm afforded. So let me just say now that it is a really creepy and surprisingly wild and just out there, kind of almost kinky horror film. And it's quite a revelation and very shocking in some places. This is a real wonderful thing. I don't speak too much about silent films, at least I haven't so far, but this is really one of the great things about the Criterion Collection, is its ability to introduce people like me to films like this. Hexam, Witchcraft Through the Ages. Wow. Your mind will be blown by this wonderful horror silent film. Here's another one, 1932, Vampir. So, Vampir is, I think, for a lot of people, a real masterpiece of horror, and I am one of those people. This is truly a masterpiece. This is one that everyone should watch. It is quite chilling, and it has a wonderfully dark atmosphere. It's wonderful how things build in this film as you watch it. It's like smoke or fog is lifting up in the very room that you're in while you watch this film. A wonderfully creepy, eerie film, Vampir. Brian De Palma's Sisters. This is from 1973, yes. And this has a great thrust to it in terms of it being a thriller, a horror film, and just a wild ride. It takes you places that you are not going to believe sometimes. And it is a schlocky film in the best sense. It is a real scary form of entertainment. It is very scary in places and quite bloody sometimes. So be warned, Sisters. Kronos, The Devil's Backbone, and Pan's Labyrinth. Now, the trilogy, as it were, or the Trilogia, can be found separately in individual releases, or it can be found in this nice, interesting box set. So, Kronos, The Devil's Backbone, and Pan's Labyrinth. So, there we go. Very interesting set of films, and these are wonderful, rich horror films. A lot is going on with these films, so you can get them collectively or individually should you choose to do so, but they are highly recommended. The Del Toro films, Kronos, Devil's Backbone, and Pan's Labyrinth. And I was so amazed by this that I stopped the film after it was over and I watched it again. Personal shopper. This feels to me like almost like an awakening in terms of its chill factor. This has a real high chill factor, and it freaked me out in many places, and I wasn't expecting that. So this is a wonderful thriller horror film with a real nice atmosphere to it. If you haven't seen this yet, please consider it, but be warned, it can get a little bit disturbing in some places. Personal shopper for your consideration. And I want to give more love to the Eclipse sets. So here is When Horror Came to Shochiku. Now, this has 4 films from the Japanese Shochiku studios, and they are all they are of varying quality. There are some that I would prefer over others, but overall as a package it is quite dynamite. Again, we have this 60s era horror from Japan, so it has a certain style and a certain way about it, so it might get some getting used to, but once you get into the rhythm and the flow, I think it will provide much entertainment and maybe a few scares and thrills along the way. hopefully. This is the set when horror came to Shochiku. This is Eclipse Series number 37, if you're interested. Okay, so let me stop there, and when I come back, I will talk about some science fiction films in the Criterion Collection.